And joining us now is the University of Toronto political science professor Ramin Jahanbegloo, and we welcome you back to TVO.
Thank you very
Good
much.
to see you again. Well,
Nice.
this, I mean, as we were saying just before we started, the whole world is watching. And I think one of the things we don't know enough about is how, in fact, the whole Iranian government works, which is why we wanted you to come in and help us understand that. You will forgive my Farsi is not what I wish it were, but government in Iran has been based on something called velayat-i faqih since the Iranian Revolution. What is that?
Well, literally we can translate it by the rule of the religious leader or the rule of the jurist. And it comes out of the mind of the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, who in the 1960s formulated the velayat faqih as a philosophy, actually, and later on as a political institution. And I would say it's a very complex system of different institutions because it has, we think of it as a very monolithic actually system, but it's made of not only the supreme leader, but also a presidency, but at the same time, different institutions like Assembly of Experts, Council of Guardians,
Okay, we'll
and
unpack
others.
all of this as we go along. But just so I'm clear, Khomeini goes back 30 years. Now, does this doctrine go back before that?
Yes, the doctrine was actually formulated by Ayatollah Khomeini in the 1960s, actually, in one of his writings. And of course, it's about the Islamic government as it was formulated by Maududi in Pakistan or by Sayyid Qutb in Egypt also. But it was his ideal of the Islamic system in Iran.
And I gather the main tenet of it is that the religious duty and the political power in the country really cannot be separated. Is that a traditional view of Shia Islam?
Not necessarily, because you know, that's the whole issue with Shiite Islam, is that among the Shiite jurists and Shiite leaders, we have quietist clergy who do not necessarily believe in the mixture between the Islamic government and religion. But Khomeini was not one of them, actually.
He wasn't?
No. He did believe in the mixture of the two.
Okay. You started to give a checklist a few moments ago, and I stopped you, but let's get into that right now. The key manifestation of the principle is the supreme leader, currently Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, not Khomeini, who was 30 years ago. Absolutely. This is Khamenei. What is the supreme leader's role within this system?
Well, the supreme leader actually does everything practically, because the supreme leader can choose the head of the broadcasting, can choose the head of the armed forces. He is at the head of the paramilitary, the head of the security forces. So he has at the same time a lot of political power, but also a lot of military power. And the only thing is that next to him is we have two other institutions, which one, as it's called Assembly of Experts, is supposed to choose the leader. But that was not the case for Mr. Khamenei.
Guardian Council. What's the Guardian Council?
Well, the Guardian Council is a council which is supposed to be chosen partly by the parliament, but also by the faqih or by the jurist council, and it's supposed to somehow have a surveillance on the elections and on the candidates and on different matters, like the ones we had recently on the elections. Who can run for the elections, either the parliamentary elections or the presidential elections, and should we rerun the elections or not?
And they decide who's allowed to run in the first place, is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
So you need to be not anybody can run, I think it's fair to say, right?
Not anybody can run,
You have to buy into the whole Islamic Revolution and so on.
Yes, most of the time, even those who were among the first architects of the Iranian Revolution, like Ayatollah Montazeri, who was on the house arrest, he cannot run for the elections, certainly not. Or Ibrahim Yazdi, who has always been, he was one of the first foreign ministers of Iran, and he's the head of one of the opposition movements, so he cannot run.
Do you have to be Iranian to run?
Yes, you have to be Iranian and you have to be Shiite.
Can you be a woman?
You can be a woman, but up to today, we have not had candidates among those who were the challengers for the presidential election as women.
But even for the parliament? Can
no,
women?
for the parliament, there are women. There have been women MPs and different ones, actually, yes.
Okay. But this is, obviously, there's one aspect of the system. The supreme leader does not get to appoint his own prime minister, obviously, right? This is an election of the prime minister by the people, And that's why we're having this conversation right now, because it's all broken down. Let's talk about legitimacy for a second. Veliat-e-Faqih, was it considered legitimate by most Iranians, as far as you can tell, in the immediate aftermath of the Khomeini revolution 30 years ago?
Yes.
It was considered so?
Yes, more or less, yes. I mean, there was a referendum, and a majority of Iranians actually went to the referendum and voted for the Islamic Republic. And of course, in the beginning, but there was a lot of debate among the different political groups from the very beginning, actually. I would like to insist on the fact that from the very first days of the Iranian Revolution, there has been a conflict between two sovereignties in Iran, one divine and one more popular and republican. And the Republican side of Iran has to do with the presidency, but also the parliament, and also the popular quest.
I think I should just correct myself from a second ago. I said prime minister. I obviously meant president, as in Ahmadinejad versus Mousavi. Is it fair to say the current protests suggest that a sizable number of Iranians now no longer consent to being governed by these principles that have been in place for 30 years?
Absolutely. I think there is a crisis of legitimacy after the division and the rift we saw between not only the architects of the revolution themselves, like Mr. Mousavi and Karoubi on the one hand, and Mr. Ahmadinejad on the other hand, but certainly between, I would say, the people, and especially the younger generation and the older generation, and especially between the people, or the nation and the state. There is quite a rift now, and we are living a legitimacy crisis today in Iran.
How long have you seen this rift coming down the pipes, as it were?
I think the rift has been there always since 30 years ago, but I think the rift became, and the division became deeper with the election of Mr. Khatami in '97, when the reformists came to power, and later on in 2005 when Ahmadinejad was elected as a president, because actually the quarrel between the two groups and the factions became more apparent. But there has always been this form of demonstrations, protests, contestations in the Iranian civil society.
Not like this, though.
Not like this one, but we should not forget that there has been, 10 years ago, there was a student movement, which turned out also in bloodshed. We should not forget the women's rights movement. We should not forget the movement of the intellectuals, which has always been there. There has always been a kind of a rift between the state, Iranian state, and the civil society, I think.
So would you suggest this is kind of the next logical evolution of some brewing discontent that's been there for at least a decade? Is that how you want to look at it?
I would look at it as I said, a kind of a legitimacy crisis, but I look at it also as a quest for democracy, which has been there for a long period of time in Iran, and especially in the past 30 years. Now, I see it as two principles negating each other, but at the same time, I think of it as a generational gap, because we are what we are watching now on the YouTube, for example, is we have a younger generation of people whom I used to call a James Dean generation, rebels without cause, but now we can call them a YouTube or a Twitter generation. These are young people who seem not to understand the older generation, or the generation of the parents who did the revolution, and they want change. And apparently they wanted to do it in a very peaceful and non-violent way. And they are not the dirt and the dust that Mr. Ahmadinejad talked about. In
fact, that's one of the things that has always surprised me, I guess, when we've had conversations on this program in the past, is that, do you want American troops to come in and do in Iran what happened in Iraq? No, no, no. Even the most anti-government, students don't want that to take place. So when you say they want something different, do they want a liberal democracy like Canada? Is that what they want?
Yes, certainly. I mean, they want their own form of democracy, which is an Iranian form of democracy. And we have to understand that the Iranian crisis, it belongs to the Iranians. They do not want any kind of intervention. And actually what is happening is that the regime is incriminating them of conspiracy theory, of being in touch with the Americans, with the British, with the Canadians. Of course not. I mean, we're talking about, of course not. I mean, we're talking about a younger generation. Look at this young philosophy student, Neda, who fell down by a Basiji shot, and she has become the hero of the Iranian movement.
She's, yeah, a young, what, 26-year-old
Yeah,
woman or
20,
something?
25, 26-year-old woman. I mean, how can she be the spy of the British or the Americans? I mean, this is nonsense, I think.
No, she wouldn't be, but since, you know, Ahmed Shalabi in Iraq, everybody is looking for that fifth column, if you will, inside Iran, who is somehow cooperating with the American government or somebody else. But you don't see that happening.
No, I think that any kind of state, I mean, has its own benefits in the, when you have movements anywhere else. Iranians, they have their own benefits in the Hamas or in the Hezbollah in Lebanon or in Palestine, okay? Americans might think of Iran, or British might think of Iran in a very strategic terms, but that does not mean that anybody who comes on the streets of Tehran asking for democracy and for the empowerment of the civil society is an American spy.
Now, you say that what they want is more an Iranian-style democracy. But of course, the leadership in Iran has always claimed that they do have an Iranian-style democracy right now. People run for office. Yes, you have to be approved by a council, but people run for office. Up until now, there hasn't been, you know, the elections have been generally seen to be clean and not filled with fraud. So is it fair to say that Iranians have, in fact, for 30 years practiced their own brand of Iranian democracy, which is, after all, what this is supposed to all be about?
No, they have practiced their efforts for democratization. Not necessarily they haven't practiced democracy. They have practiced their efforts, especially in the civil society. But where you don't have accountability and where you can have frauds in the election, that does not mean that you have democracy. I mean, then we need a lot of efforts to get there. And I don't see how we can obtain democracy with violence and bloodshed. I mean, there's no way you can get to justice, to a government of justice, a democratic government, through violence and by shooting on the innocent people on the streets.
Well, that's how it happened in Iraq. You had a war, and now you've got something closer to a democracy than you had before.
Yes, I mean...
That's not a model for Iran?
No, I don't think the military intervention is a model, and I've never believed in the fact that democracy is a gift that can be given to you by any other nation. I mean, you have to experiment it yourself, and this is how Iranians have been doing it themselves, especially in the Iranian civil society, and especially the younger generation. They've been fighting for it.
Well, let me follow up on that, because you wrote something in, that was published in the Los Angeles Times last week, and here's an excerpt dealing with the young people in particular. The young Iran's quest for democracy has presented serious challenges, not only to the status of the doctrine of Valayat-e Faqih, the rule of religious jurists, but to the reform movement and its democratic authenticity. Talk to us more about the challenge of the youth. What is that? What is special about that it represents?
Well, I think it's the challenge at several levels. It's a challenge of mentality. It's a challenge of structural changes. It's a challenge of, I would say, a new approach towards the world. I mean, the YouTube generation shows us that these young people, they are quite globalized. They knew their new technologies, and they want to be informed about the world, and they want to inform the world about their own lives. So several levels of changes, and certainly they are against any form of conservatism, and they want to empower themselves to become visible.
No, we get that. We understand how they're challenging the mullahs. How are they challenging the reform movement to step up at this particular time? I
think they've been challenging also the reform movement, because somebody like Mr. Mousavi, who was one of the architects of the revolution, and we should not forget that he was a prime minister in the 1980s, now he's talking about becoming a martyr of this movement, and he said he's ready to die for this movement.
You believe him?
It's not a question that I believe him or not, is that he was, I think at some point he's at the level of his moral stand. I mean, I've never thought that he would be at this level. I think at the level of going out with the people and staying where he is. So, and standing where he is. I think that it's very important what he has been doing, but he's not the only one. And I myself, I do believe more in the young people. I mean, people like Neda who are demonstrating or who want to go out and show their dissatisfaction, and they want to show change, and they want to show that they are for democracy, and they want to show that they have a word to say in this system.
Do you think the young people see any potential in reforming the status quo, or is this a kind of this is a moment in history, we need another revolution, throw them all out? What do they want?
You know, these young people, they are not all revolutionaries. We have to understand that. And they did not want to make a revolution. They wanted to change things through the election. And they thought that they could do that through electoral ways or electoral democracy, but it did not work. So they were very dissatisfied. But now they are at the second level of their movement, which is no more about the elections. It's about the fact that they say, well, on the one hand, we have non-violent truth seekers. On the other hand, we have violent people who lie to others, you know? So there is a kind of a dialectic and confrontation between between a younger generation who's taking a moral stand, and on the other hand, you have people who are protecting their authority, protecting their legitimacy, and shooting on people.
Let me do one last follow-up in our last 30 seconds on this issue of legitimacy. Given the events of recent days, can you imagine that this principle of velayat-e faqih could possibly regain widespread legitimacy in the near future?
I think that even if the movement stops tomorrow, and even if Mr. Ahmadinejad is considered as the next president of Iran and everything quiets down, the things are not going to be the same way they were before. Certainly something has changed in Iran, has changed in the eyes of the public opinion around the world about Iran. I hope that we're not going to go towards a Tiananmen moment. Mm-hmm. And certainly because that's going to be a huge bloodshed. But I have a lot of hope in what's happening today in Iran.
Professor Jahanbegloo, it's always good of you to join us here in TVO. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.